was now making billions, and at the heart of it was data. It had become a new gold rush. Products of more and more companies around the world were set up to mine all the traces of human behaviour everywhere. And nothing was quite what it seemed. The makers of Roomba revealed that new models would also be able to gather and transmit information about the inside of people's homes. People, though, they added, could always turn this off if they wanted.
Hi, I'm Tristan, Global Passion Ambassador for WeVibe, couples vibrator.
And even the vibrator, WeVibe, was discovered transmitting data about people's private behaviour back to the servers.
Good morning, Kayla.
Good morning. I love the morning, don't you?
While the German government instructed parents to destroy any models of Kayla the doll, because it contained what they called a concealed espionage device that could also transmit personal data about the behaviour of the whole family. And Pokemon Go, which was created by a subsidiary of Google, was more than just a game. As well as extracting even more data from the players' phones, it was also what one researcher described as persuasive gaming. An experiment to see if you could move mass groups of people around to where you wanted them. As well as having fun, the players could also be guided to what was called sponsored locations, cafes and bars that would pay to be a part of the system. One journalist described the aim. Pokemon, she said, is about herding people to monetize checkpoints without them being fully aware of it. All this was not only creating a world where human behaviour could be predicted, it was going to do something else. Something that scientists and engineers had been struggling with for 50 years. It was finally going to solve the problem of how to create real artificial intelligence. But it would do it by creating machines that could see a different kind of reality, one that was hidden from human beings. The key figure who did this was a psychologist called Geoffrey Hinton. He was the great-great-grandson of George Boole, who had invented Boolean logic that is behind all the algorithms in modern computers. In the 1990s, Hinton realised that the idea that you can create AI by feeding rules of human logic into the machines had completely failed. What Hinton said was that you do the opposite. You get rid of all the rules of logic, and instead feed a mass of data into the computer and let it look for its own connections and patterns. He used what were called neural networks, where the connections inside the computer mimicked the human brain.
Back in the 90s, there was a completely different paradigm that wasn't called artificial intelligence, it was called neural networks, that said, we know about an intelligent system, it's the brain. And the way that works is you have lots of little processors with lots of connections between them, and you change the strengths of the connections, and that's how you learn things. And those connection strength change have to somehow be driven by data. You're not programmed, you somehow absorb information from data. And you can't do it with rules, there's too many rules to write. You just have to learn it from data.
Now, that data was available online, and Hinton began to feed millions of words and images into the machines, and instructed them to look for patterns. To learn a language, the neural network would look for which particular words appeared next to each other in the billions of sentences they were scanning, and which were far apart. The machine is not interested in the meaning of the sentence, only the patterns. It was a completely different way of making sense of reality. Human beings told themselves stories about what was happening around them minute by minute. Hinton's neural networks were a kind of intelligence that completely ignored all stories. Instead, they crossed back and forth across time and space as they searched through data on the internet, looking for links and patterns that human beings would never be able to see or understand. Hinton began to work on artificial intelligence at Google, and he gave what he had created a name. He called it Vector World. It expressed what was becoming one of the most powerful mythologies of our age. The idea that had begun with complexity theory in the early 1990s. It said that the world is too complicated for us as human beings to understand. But nothing is too complicated for the machines and the data, for they can see the hidden reality under the surface. And this new fragmented way of ordering reality into patterns was going to spread. And as it did, it would detach human beings even further from understanding what was happening in the real world. In the banks, computers were being used to package the vast amounts of mortgages that were being lent in the property boom to everyone and anyone. The computers cut up the dangerous high-risk loans and recombined them with other, safer loans. The bankers believed that this neutralised the risk and stabilised the system. But as they did this, the connection of the debts to human reality was broken. Instead, they simply became patterns of millions of fragments of meaningless data moving harmlessly around the system in the server farms. What had happened was that the bankers, the risk analysts, the rating agencies, the accountants, and the politicians had all given themselves up to this new way of thinking. A way of thinking that said that the data and the algorithms understood the complexity of the world better than you did, which meant that none of them saw the absurdity of what was really happening. A vast wave of money was being lent to millions of poor people who could never afford to pay it back. But then it got more complicated, because human beings were also exposed to the avalanche of data online. And they started to behave in very much the same way as Geoffrey Hinton's artificial intelligence machines. They too spent vast amounts of time searching through all the data, looking for patterns, links, and coincidences that had no obvious meaning. But being human beings, they then turned them into fantastic, elaborate stories. They were called conspiracy theories. "40 years before, Kerry Thornley and his friend Greg Hill had started what they called Operation Mindfuck. They had spread the conspiracy theory that the Illuminati were really the secret rulers of the world. They had done it to parody and ridicule all conspiracy theories, because they thought that they undermined the confidence of individuals and made them easier to control. But now, in the mass of data online, those stories about the Illuminati got mixed up with other conspiracies, both true and false. And out of it came extraordinary, dreamlike stories built out of fragments of truth and fiction. Millions of people became convinced that all the major stars, from Britney Spears to Beyoncé, were being manipulated and controlled by the Illuminati. The theory said that the Illuminati had worked with the CIA and their MKUltra project, and with Walt Disney, to create a new system of mind control. The stars' videos contained hidden messages, above all images of triangles put there by the Illuminati. Telltale clues to what is really happening. And in it, Shaka had attacked the way the black community was already in the 1990s retreating into conspiracy theories about the Illuminati. They were doing it, he said, to avoid confronting the very real powers that did control their lives.
Turmoil on the American housing market gets even worse, and the aftershocks wipe tens of billions off world stock markets. The organizations which underpin mortgage lending in America need a multi-billion-dollar bailout.
Are you taking me? Are you asking me for a critic?
In 2008, the systems in the banks that had structured the mortgage loans failed completely. It led to a global economic crash. The governments in Britain and America rescued the banks. But they then decided to transfer the debt that incurred away from the private sector to the public sector. And what was called austerity began. That decision was going to have powerful consequences because it created anger among millions of people outside the system. Then, in the wake of the crash, evidence of widespread corruption came out. That all the major banks had been rigging interest rates, and many of them had been laundering money for organised crime, including the drug cartels in Mexico. But again, nothing seemed to change. A few lowly people were prosecuted, and experts talked of reforms and stress tests. And the shock among those outside the system grew further. And from that came the reaction.
It was the elites and people like you and me. People that bought into the system. And who's been held accountable? Name me one banker, one CEO, one law firm, one accounting firm. We basically just flooded the zone with liquidity. We bailed out the party of Davos. Or let me say it differently. The party of Davos, the scientific, engineering, managerial, financial, cultural elite, bailed themselves out. Remember, this populist movement and Donald Trump is not the cause of this. They're the product of this.
And it worked on different levels. It was, the most obvious level was we've got to take back control from Brussels, but it was also, and I think David Cameron and George Osborne didn't quite appreciate this, it was also about taking back control from, of the system itself. It was for a lot of people to take back control, made them think, yeah, these are the guys who screwed up the economy, who drove it off a cliff in 2008, whose mates are all the Goldman Sachs bankers and the hedge funders on massive bonuses. Us mugs on PAYE are the ones paying the bills for this. We'll show those guys. We'll take back control from you lot in London.
There's no magnets sticking to people's arms. Those are fakes. Fact checked. Yeah. Yet the science behind magnetic bio-nanotechnology has been out there and has been used before in several applications. Magnetic nanosensors have become attractive instruments for the diagnosis and treatment of different diseases. They represent an efficient carrier system in drug delivery or in transporting contrast agents. Contrast agents, I love it. They absolutely love to throw people off with that. Oh, contrast agents, don't know what that is. Doesn't sound like a big deal, won't bother to look that up. You know what? Go research Dr. Carrie Madej, and she will explain to you how you can take a substance with this type of nanotechnology in combination with bioluminescent technology. You could possibly create a marker in a targeted part of the body and use imaging equipment to scan and detect the marker. They've made it known already. Radio contrast agents. What are radio contrast agents? Radio contrast agents are substances such as iodine or barium compounds